Hey everybody, I'm Alex Hangstifer from Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and we're here today with Val Stanley from Oregon State University. And as you can see right now, we're actually both in our homes. We're currently still dealing with the pandemic of 2020, so if you hear any odd noises, we can just disregard that. We're just in our neighborhood, so we'll do the best that we can. And today we're going to do a really fun career path interview. So the inspiration for this project came up after being asked many times by educators to come into classrooms and give career path talks. And so what we hope today is have an inspiring talk about how Val got to where she is today. So with that, Val, I'll throw it over to you so you can introduce yourself.
Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Val Stanley. I work at the Oregon State University's Marine and Geology Repository, where I am the Antarctic Core Curator. So I take care of a collection of seafloor sediment samples from the Southern Ocean.
Well, awesome. That's super cool. I do something very, very similar. So your career path is near and dear to my heart. And what can you describe what this image is on the screen that everybody's seeing? These really cool racks full of ocean mud.
Yes, full of mysteries. This is a photo inside of our core repository up here in Corvallis, Oregon. So we have racks that are 20 feet tall, and inside the racks we have these cages, which are holding tubes of sediment from all over the world. We have over 22 miles of mud in the core repository, and this is just a photo of the space that has things in it. So there's an entire other set of racks that are empty, which for people like Alex and I is just such a delightful thing to see as empty space. Lots of room to expand, hopefully for the next 50 years is the expectation.
Wow, yeah, that's a really important thing to point out. And I think we'll kind of loop back to this at the end of the talk when we talk a little bit more about what you do day to day in your job. Let's go kind of back to the beginning. So where did you grow up? Where were you born and raised?
So I'm from good old York County, Pennsylvania, over on the East Coast. Grew up in the York Suburban School District and enjoyed a childhood of Girl Scouts and camping and just being really active in school and band and choir. So just good old childhood in PA.
Great, yeah, good part of the country to grow up in. And so so you said choir and band. So what were your interests inside of school? What were your favorite subjects growing up?
Awesome question. So from my youngest youth aspirations of what will you be when you grow up, I was pretty serious about being just like Bob Ross and painting pictures on TV. That was actually like my first goal. So I was pretty excited about the arts. I went to a lot of art camps, did some ceramics in high school. So that was sort of a goal for a little while. But eventually it kind of came back around to a pretty heavy interest in the sciences. And before I went off to college, I was pretty sure I was going to be a chemistry major. But sneak preview, ever since I was a little kid, I had this terrible habit of picking up rocks and collecting the best ones. So I feel like that was a little bit of foreshadowing in hindsight.
Yeah, you were an inspiring curator from the get-go. Do you have any least favorite subjects or just things that weren't quite as interesting for you?
Oh, good question. I think that, there were some classes on history that were kind of just not my cup of tea. And then I think as I got older, stats, it was just something that just I couldn't get stoked on.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way. And I love history now, but I feel sometimes it's a lot of times the way things are presented. And statistics are important, but yeah, they can be very hard to get through.
Totally agree.
And so were there any particular moments that you can remember that really inspired you to maybe in high school to actually go and pursue science in terms of when you were looking at colleges?
Gosh, that's a great question. I feel like there was a part in like AP Chem, and I also just had like a really great instructor that really just captured my attention, and we really got along really well. And that kind of drew me into it, and I just loved knowing how and why the natural world worked, and that we could like predict that with numbers. It wasn't just, we know that like the sun sets and the sun rises. It's like, here are these angles and trajectories. And so putting all of that together was very cool. And I kind of feel like thermodynamics, like when I was figuring out like why the ice in my water melts, and that we could like prove that, was kind of awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I think finding that applied knowledge, so you learn something in school, but then you see it working in the real world, is super helpful in making those connections. And just something to clarify, so AP, advanced placement, were you on the advanced placement track for all of your classes, or did you have a mix of different levels of classes, just for students out there who may be interested in knowing, what kind of classes and levels that you took?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, so let's see, how did my school structure it? Starting in middle school, you could have kind of an advanced placement track. And they put me in that in 7th grade, I guess. And so then I just, from that point on, was in the advanced. And then I think at some point they called it honors classes. And then when you were a senior, basically the honors classes were all considered AP, but I assume that's for some sort of college integration reasoning.
Yep, yep. And yeah, and some schools allow you to take advanced placement testing, and then you can test out of lower level college courses. So that's something to point out too.
Yeah, I somehow managed to test out of computer class too, which is really funny in hindsight, that was something that I was like really motivated in testing out of, because I was like, I know computers. I don't need to take that class. I have other better things to take, like extra science classes.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020 there. I feel, yeah, I thought I was very knowledgeable in computers, and now many years later, technology has advanced so much. But I think you're doing good. So
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to your undergrad. So what was that process like? Where did you end up applying, and where did you ultimately end up going?
Yeah, so let's see. Right when I decided, I started shopping around for schools, and I was kind of looking around the Pennsylvania, kind of any state that bordered Pennsylvania was kind of my range that I was looking in. And there was a very brief period of time where I was pretty sure that I was going to, well, not pretty sure, but I was curious about being a large animal vet. So I had actually gone to a couple of schools and took a look around for equine science. But then again, I shadowed a vet and decided that like I just wasn't going to be like sitting around petting horses all the time. So I didn't do it. And then where did I all take a look at? Yeah, so it's just a couple East Coast schools. And I'd just been working with, resources at my high school, talking about places that would be a good fit. And I ended up, early decision. So I applied to Oberlin College early decision. So I just kind of put all my eggs in that basket and said, I would really, really like to go here. So actually the story is I only applied to Oberlin College because I got in. And I had a couple schools that took the same common application in Pennsylvania. I think Dickinson was my other school that I was kind of excited about. So if I hadn't gotten into Oberlin, I had some backup ideas and I didn't have to apply all at the same time, save some money on application fees. But also it was no, never mind. That wasn't college. That was grad school. But anyway, so I ended up at Oberlin College in Northern Ohio. It's a small liberal arts school, about a little under an hour from Cleveland. It's known for its Conservatory of Music. So when you tell people you went to Oberlin, people are like, so do you do music? And it's like, well, I'm actually the child of 2 music majors. So while that probably would have delighted them, that's not what I'm there for. And I was also very attracted to the school because they had just built a new science center, which was very snazzy and new, and they had integrated most of their science departments. However, the geology department did not move. And so this is a photo of Carnegie Library, Carnegie Hall, which was one of the original buildings on campus that was the library, but it became the admissions building. And if you look up in the top, what I like to call the belfry, those top 2 stories are the geology department. And so that's where I hung out a lot.
Well, it's beautiful. Yeah, very, very East Coast lush and green. And so when you applied early decision, did you have to declare a major? So did you end up declaring a major at any point in time in the beginning when you first were applying?
No, I don't think Oberlin required you to like pick a major right from the get-go, but I did kind of put myself on the science track and start looking into kind of what the course requirements would be for a chemistry major. So I was taking thermodynamics, I was taking math. Yeah.
So how did you make that transition to geology? Had you had any geology prior, or was it just something, because I know for myself, geology was kind of touched on in high school a little bit in earth sciences, but it wasn't until college that I had like the first experience with being in an actual geology course. So what was that transition over to geology like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting that you say that, because I also feel that like there was like some really awesome, rock identification in like 5th grade. And then there was some in high school, but generally like in the advanced placement track that I was in, it sort of skipped over geology, which I think is tragic. And I think everybody should get to know all the things. Then once I kind of got my bearings at Oberlin and started kind of getting to know people, I was introduced to some of the professors in the geology department, and I kind of liked the smaller, even though I'm at a small school, an even smaller, more intimate feel. Everybody seemed to know each other. All the instructors went by their first names, and I just like chemistry was getting pretty intense pretty quick. And I just sort of decided that it would be fun to take intro. Like I had room in my schedule, and I thought, well, for fun, I always thought geology was cool, and just decided that I would take that class for fun, and then it just kind of took off from there. It was like, yep, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, I think that's really great to point out is a couple of things is when you do have an opportunity to take something that looks cool, it can be totally life altering. I've talked to so many people where they just, like you had room in their schedule, said this class looks amazing, let me try it. And it really changed the course of their educational career. And another thing to point out that you said too was the idea that you had access to your professors, you had small classes. Those are all really important things when students are looking at colleges to figure out, are you okay in like big classrooms where you don't really see your professor one-on-one a lot, or do you want a small liberal arts school where you can, really engage kind of one-on-one? So yeah, well, so then what degree did you end up earning from Oberlin?
Yeah, so I got a Bachelor of Arts in Science. And so my major was geology. And lo and behold, I minored in history, actually.
There you go. It comes back.
Yeah. Yep. I think it was the second term of my freshman year. I just had like a lot of space in my schedule. And I was like, what am I going to do with it? And just because of where I was in the registration timeline, there just happened to be a lot of openings in the history department. So I took some cool, I think I took a writing class, and I took just some cool like environmental history classes. And then that was just kind of neat to do a different take on history than just like American history, which was sort of a big focus in high school.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice complement to science.
Yeah, and geology is a history, really. So
yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand geology is very all-encompassing, and so you talk about physical processes, you talk about chemical processes, biological processes. It's all this big system. So yeah, a lot of people think it's just a corner of science, and I tend to look at it as it encompasses pretty much all of our Earth's history, which is amazing.
Yep.
So did you do anything like internships or any other kind of outside of the classroom experiences in undergraduate that either A, kind of led you to know what you wanted to do after you graduated or inspired your career path?
Great question. So the first thing that I did was a research experience for undergraduates in REU. And that was actually with an instructor at Oberlin College, Carla Parsons Hubbard. And that was, I think it was right after I graduated. There's a consortium of small schools that sort of work together. I think there's just sort of, it's easier to get accepted into these REUs called the Keck Consortium. And Oberlin joined it, I think, like 3 years after I left. So this was sort of in the same style as that. So it was like a 10-week internship. We went out to Colorado and I got this awesome experience working in paleontology, collecting Cretaceous fossils for these fossilized methane seep deposits in the middle of the country. So that's what these little hills are that you're looking at here with some geologists surveying. I think you can see two people out there. And so these are just chunks of limestone that are full of really cool fossils and a lot of clams. The clams thought the methane bubbles were delicious. And kind of the flat surrounding area, which is all a former interior sea that existed in North America. So all of this and like putting the classroom component together. And also I just was lucky enough that I got hired on as a very fresh perspective. I hadn't quite declared geology yet. I think I'd had 2 classes and was accepted into this program. Had a really great summer. All of the interns in the end were women. So 4 of us from Oberlin and then 2 women from Gustavus Adolphus College up in St. Peter, Minnesota. And a couple professors. And I think we did partner with someone from UC Riverside for a little bit in there. So just like being a part of that like research team experience and everything was really cool. And I was really interested in finding ways to make money over the summer that included research experience. It just seemed like the best overall decision to make. I don't know why my 20-year-old self was serious about that, but I took it very seriously.
I think that's very important. You know, all these decisions, you know, you have to find a way to be funded and fund yourself and eat and live. And so yeah, I think it is important to point out that how are you going to be able to be paid for these awesome experiences. Something else to point out is that with geology, a lot of the ways that you collect your samples or your information is going out into the field. So had you been to Colorado before, or was this your first experience getting to travel there?
Oh, I think this is true. Let me make sure this is true. I think it was my first time leaving the Eastern time zone. I loved it. It was great.
Yeah, I think that's true for so many students. So getting engaged in internships and research opportunities is just such a great way to broaden out your experience. Okay, so then you said you ultimately graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Science with a geology major and history minor. So what was next? What kind of led your next steps after you graduated?
So interestingly, the summer between my junior and senior year, I did another REU program. And I ended up at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis with a crew of other undergraduates. So here's all of us at our final poster presentation, and we all sort of assisted with graduate student and professors' pet projects. This is an NSF-funded program. They did it for about 10 years, though I think the Minnesota REU is no longer a thing now. But it was also definitely sort of a feeder exercise. A lot of us did end up applying to Minnesota. A lot of us did end up going to grad school. So it kind of gave us a little bit of like a mini thesis, like here's one little problem that you could solve in 10 weeks. I think a couple of us did field work, but primarily it was all lab work and just living in the dorms and So yeah, it was a great time. And that was very formative. And I knew after that that I was pretty interested in petrology and structural geology. I just thought that like subduction zone geology was just the coolest thing. So where two plates collide, a lot like the West Coast is nowadays. And so I applied to several different schools. And in the end, decided to go to Minnesota. So I was accepted there and went straight into a master's degree.
Beautiful. It's gorgeous out there.
This photo is not in Minnesota, I will say.
So where is that photo? Did you find yourself kind of just jumping into field work in your master's program?
Yes, exactly. So I went out to Minnesota and got hooked into a big research program that had been going for years in central Turkey. So I went out to Turkey with that research team in the summer of 2008 to collect my samples and gather field data. So this is kind of near one of the field sites that had like a really great photo of the rocks that I was working with. And kind of the large scale, the stripes that you see are these really awesome features that I was kind of looking to describe a little better. And it was a very rural area. So there's me with one of the sheepdogs and a whole bunch of sheep behind us.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, the geology is just massive out there. That's amazing. So was that your first time outside of the country, or had you traveled anywhere near Turkey before?
I had not been to Asia, and I had traveled just a little bit previous to that. I'd done some traveling with my then boyfriend, now husband, after I graduated. We went to Iceland and to the UK and Scotland and just kind of had an awesome little post-graduation summer encounter. I don't know, just traveled around for a couple of weeks. So it was great. But other than that, no, I remember getting my passport for the first time in like 2007.
Yeah, well, your travels outside of field work are also important to point out. I think for those of us sitting within this pandemic are excited to do that again. And for students, definitely taking a look at opportunities to travel and just see new things gives you just brand new perspectives. So that those experiences were probably quite formative too, which is awesome.
Oh, absolutely. Like Iceland, seeing glaciers for the first time, considering now where my line of work is, there's a lot of times where I'm like, I could go back and look at that again. And that would be very important for me to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you got to take the opportunity while they're here to go visit.
Yeah, yes, completely.
Great. So then what degree did you get at Minnesota? Was it a master's in geology or?
Yeah, so it was a master's in geology. At that time, the department was combined with geophysics. So it's now the School of Earth Sciences or something like that. But at that point, it was the Department of Geology and Geophysics. So Master of Science in Geology.
Great. So are there any other kind of standout moments in your master's program? Was it, did you enjoy the program? Did you find that you were mainly doing research, or did you take a lot of classes along with field work and research?
Good question. I feel like master's work is like pretty intense, as are all grad degrees, but I feel like you have to get a lot of classwork done before you get to the point where you can really focus on writing your thesis. And you then have it's a pretty compressed timeline. So you have to really, consider the subject and the project that you're working on so that you don't bite off more than you can chew and don't make it into a just sort of scaled back PhD, because that's not what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah, so I mean, I feel like it was very busy. And by the end, I was pretty stoked and happy to turn it in. But I had a lot of fun getting to know, that's my dog drinking water in the background. Chugging. Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun working in the lab and learning about new techniques to learn more about rock microstructures. And that was pretty cool. and making all of that relate back to these huge things that we saw in the field on these hillsides was very, very cool. And just being a part of the grad school community, we were pretty tight at that period of time. And so being there and cheering on my friends as they all graduated and moved on, it was very cool.
Yeah, that sense of community is super important. And also, you know, those friends that keep you going through graduate school tend to become your colleagues later in life, which is a really great way to continue on the friendship and the relationship. So great. Yeah. I think that's also one thing that you pointed out is managing your time and really focusing on the projects that you do so you don't bite off more than you can chew. Those are really important things for students who are considering graduate programs. And then what level of graduate program are you interested in? So you graduated with your master's, and then what did you do afterwards? What did you apply for other programs, or did you go right into job market search?
Yeah, so I was hanging around Minnesota, and I considered going back and getting another master's in science policy. So I applied and was accepted into the Humphrey School of Public Affairs at the University of Minnesota. And then my goal for that was I was going to work on policy development for carbon sequestration. They had a professor there that was working on these really cool, in my opinion, very geologic solutions to capturing carbon from the atmosphere and basically turning it into sand. And I thought that was very neat and totally applicable, but I wasn't sure about how policy life would work for me. And, you know, going to the public affairs department felt very fast paced. So I decided to pump the brakes and I deferred for a year to think about it. And ended up looking for jobs. And I ended up working at the National Lacustrine Core Storage Facility at the University of Minnesota. Full disclosure, my husband was working on his PhD, so I was pretty sure I was going to stay in the Twin Cities metro area. It was great. They were folks that I already knew from the department, and I got to just kind of hop in and help out doing any old job they needed.
Great. Yeah. So just to point out to people, lacustrine just means lake. So these lake cores. So the ocean community of people who work with cores also tend to work fairly closely with the lake core community. And that's a huge facility. It's a really great opportunity that you took. So then did you end up deferring the master's program altogether, or did you end up going into the program?
Good question. So I decided that ultimately, as much as I liked the idea of working on science policy and kind of using my powers for good, as I thought at the time, it just seemed like it would be just ever so slightly parallel to science, which was something that was very near and dear to me. And I didn't know if that would ultimately kind of frustrate me. The degree was pretty expensive, was going to have to go into doing some more stats work and ultimately end up in probably the DC area. And I was like, nah, I don't know. So I decided to pass on that opportunity and just kind of stick around, work at the Lake Lab for a little while and then see where things would go from there. But it's still something that's definitely an interest to me. And I love the idea of scientists in policy.
Yeah, it's so important, but it's also important to know yourself and really the work that you are passionate about, because it's easy to fizzle out if you're mainly passionate about doing research and now you can't because you're working on the policy side. So all really important considerations. Again, also with money and loans and considering what kind of debts do you want to take on. So these are all important things for people to be considering as they're moving forward. And to also point out, it doesn't matter where you are in your career or in your life, you can always stop and go back to school. So these are always options that are on the table. So after you worked at LACOR, what was your next steps? Did you apply for other jobs?
Yes. So as I was working at the Core Lab, I worked on some projects there. There's a lot of pictures of me doing things. I am verifying the roundness of those vegetation counting rings. That's what's going on down there. And so I ended up working at the Minnesota Geological Survey down the road, just over into St. Paul. And yeah, they hired me on as a quaternary mapper. So translation, more recent geologic history, and then hyperlocal translation. A lot of the most recent geological features at the surface that get mapped in Minnesota are glacial remnants of when the glaciers were covering the top part of North America 2 million years ago, but primarily everything you see in Minnesota is about 30,000 years old or newer. And so those materials need to get mapped in order for a lot of, local construction, policy, environmental considerations. So the survey has been working on and will be working on for a long time, mapping each of the counties individually for all of its geologic history and natural resources. And so I got brought into that and dropped into a project to map one of the counties out there.
Wow, that's super interesting. How did you find that kind of opportunity? Was it just in looking for other jobs, or was it by like association, maybe somebody you were already working with?
Great question. So they had some mapper opportunities that were posted, and I just kind of been keeping an eye out, and I knew some folks that worked at the survey and had asked them about kind of what their job was like. And so I applied, and they kind of put people into the different divisions of mapping at the survey. And based on the fact that I was at the lake core sediment lab, a lot of the description and work going into making a glacial sediment superficial plate or map is actually describing sediments over and over and over again. So we do a lot of subsurface investigations. They had already collected a bunch of like 300-foot cores the summer before, and they needed somebody to describe them. So they were like, hey, Val can do that. And there were some challenges getting to know GIS systems better, but that was something that ultimately I just thought was the coolest thing. And I think working with elevation models is just a ton of fun. I could stare at geomorphic features like all day.
Well, yeah, and something to point out too is that by this point, your skill set has been just growing and growing and growing in terms of different kinds of experiences that you've had. So it really is like setting you up nicely to move into all these different types of professions, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, it's wild, just like this fully like and genuinely interested in all this aspects of geology, and just like it's been a lot of fun. I like all of it.
Yeah, and I think that's I think having these diverse interests, I think really kind of keeps you passionate and asking questions and just learning more. And so where did this lead? So this was just a project you were working on with this survey, right?
Yeah, so this is just a map of superficial geology of the entire state. And then I made this map, which looks much cooler now that the cartographers have finished it up and put all my figures and captions onto it. But I just threw that in and mapped some really neat features. Found some really cool stuff in aerial imagery, which just has way more applications than you think than just Google Street View. Taught me more about doing land-based drilling in various styles of things, and ultimately helped me to kind of make the tie between sediment descriptions and data collection in the field, and then bringing that in and working in it digitally. So it's sort of also got things fired up about digital data management and like workflow efficiencies, and something that I get weirdly nerdy and passionate about.
Well, now as a curator, and I'm sure you'll touch on this, data management is very, very important. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, so I was at Minnesota. The survey, it was a good time, but I sort of felt like I was going to end up being the person that mapped the suburbs for the rest of my life, which is very important. A lot of people live there. I actually have friends now that are in the engineering world that use the map that I made in their daily work occasionally, and that's like pretty cool and fulfilling, and was a neat way to kind of tie research and all this data collection back to like very practical everyday applications, which feels really good. But was looking to possibly do something a little bit different and work with a different organization that sort of fit with me a little bit better. Liked doing something a little bit more creative. And so just sort of saw this. Actually, I was at a conference, and one of the scientists at the Wisconsin Geological and Natural History Survey told me that they were looking to hire a new core lab manager. So I looked up that posting, and sure enough, they were looking for someone to come in and sort of refresh their sample management systems. They have a huge core facility outside of town. So 600,000 linear feet of rock core actually from around the state. And I thought between the superficial mapping and Midwestern geological understandings, kind of being a nerd about data management and having more opportunities to sort of work and develop that skill set, and then taking what I learned about sample management from the core lab at Minnesota and putting all of that together just seemed like a cool opportunity. And so I applied for it, and they brought me in, and it worked out.
Well, that's great. Yeah, all of your experiences really kind of came together there, that you were probably the perfect candidate.
It felt like a really good fit.
And so what were your main goals while you were there? And I guess something to point out too is that there are these types of state surveys with these big sample repositories all across the nation for people who are interested in either this kind of career path or also accessing these kinds of samples from different states.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the really cool things there was working with students that use the collections from around the state, and then also nationally would come to us because there were certain rock types that only exist in Wisconsin, or the setting in which they were deposited was unique, or people were working on more like engineering or hydrogeology related, aquifers and aquitards investigations. So I really thought it was cool that there were these samples that, to me, it was like, well, you're describing the rocks and then you're writing papers on it. But having people return to the same samples from different research disciplines was very, very cool.
Yeah, I think these large sample collections, I look at them as like libraries or lending libraries, but of basically Earth history. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to preserve them. And so how long were you at the Wisconsin repository?
I was there for 3 years. Yeah, and it was good. It was a great learning experience. I feel like I really gained a lot of skills and had a lot of room to be autonomous and work with a really great supervisor at the same time, to develop some new and interesting ideas for field data collection, which was a really fun pet project for me, as well as managing and inventorying the collection better so that people could use it more easily.
Yeah, and your previous slide too, I mean, that's a huge collection, hundreds and thousands of samples. So
yep.
Not a trivial task at all. Did you find that do you feel like you did a lot of organizing, both physically and digitally, while you were there?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons for that was there's a project that's funded by the United States Geological Survey to preserve data, and working in the data preservation program with the funds that we were allocated from them was something that really helped. It really was probably my favorite part of working there, was that piece of taking these physical samples, actually physically organizing them, but then also collecting the digital data and then getting that put together in a way that someday could be put outward facing from our website.
Yeah, yeah. If people don't know what samples you have and that they're there, then it's hard to get people to use them. So that's amazing. Yeah, that's looks like a lot of organizing.
Yes, yes. But it was so rewarding because things got used right away. And it was something where, like state survey repositories are a pretty quiet place. And so getting the word out that this is a resource that people could use and making it not a pain to do so was rewarding.
Wow, yeah, that's great. So you said you were there for 3 years. So what were your next steps? Did you have a job opportunity come up, or did you just decide you wanted to kind of move elsewhere into a different part of the profession?
For sure. So it was just kind of an odd time to be a state employee in Wisconsin, to be honest. And we didn't have any family in Madison, and finding opportunities for my partner to work in town were not as optimal as we'd expected. And so we were just open to the idea of trying something new. It wasn't something that I was really actively looking for another job, but I was on a bunch of listservs related to work. I'd met the curators, such as Alex, when I was at this job. And I knew that it was very cool to have this community of, support and folks that kind of understood what you were working on. And it was just nice to have, not my army of one person plus my 2 students to kind of get everything done. And I had read a posting for Oregon State that they were looking for this new core curator. And then I had read in the news, actually, I think it was like the Science magazine had posted about how Oregon State was going to be bringing in a collection of samples from Florida State, which is a whole nother story. But anyway, that's how my job position was created, essentially. And I read that and thought, well, I would throw my hat in the ring because why not? So I just sort of opportunistically applied to see what would happen.
Yeah, I think a couple of things you pointed out there is, these sample collections, there is an international community of these kinds of repositories. And I think that kind of support is really important, because I feel like there are a lot of issues that each repository kind of deals with, but they're very similar between repositories. And yeah, definitely being very opportunistic is a good thing. I think you also pointed out that, not having family in Madison and having a partner who is also looking for career opportunities. These are all important considerations, when you're deciding on professions. So great. So you applied, and I think I know it turned out pretty well in terms of Oregon State.
Yeah. So yeah, I ended up there. It was great. They brought me out for an interview, and I remember flying home and looking out the window, and it just happened to be that the interviews were in the summer in Oregon when everything is sunny and beautiful, and I could see the mountains, and I thought, well, that was a really cool trip to Oregon. And and then I got the message that they'd like to offer me the position. And so we had a discussion at home and decided that moving to Oregon was worth it, and then we'd give it a try.
Great. Yeah. That's not a bad place to end up. Oregon's pretty cool. The Pacific Northwest is quite beautiful. Okay, so what do you do now? What does your kind of day-to-day look like as the core curator there?
Oh man, well, that is a great question. Do I have any pictures in here? We'll leave it here.
Maybe if you'll go back a couple of slides, maybe you could talk about your team of people there.
Yes.
In terms of being able to make the whole repository run.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's also nice to be working with a bit more of a team. We're not huge, but there's still a couple folks that I get to work with pretty frequently, which is wonderful. Yeah, so there are two principal investigators. They're my bosses, so to say, both professors in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State. We have a head curator, Maisie Chesby, who's been with the repository for 10 years now, I think. Kara Fritz is our assistant curator, and she's been around a little bit longer than me. We have our rock curator, Kevin Conrad. He will be leaving us for a new position soon, but it's been great to have him around to manage our rocks, and he has really just made that whole collection so much. He's really refreshed it, and he did a great job. Bobby Kennard, she's our emerita curator. She has officially stepped back and is enjoying the world of retirement and hopefully having a great time out working with her horses now, much more often than core data. But every once in a while, we do consult her on some legacy samples. And Rupert Minette, he's a software engineer. He's worked with one of our PIs, Anthony Coppers, for, I want to say 10 or 15 years now. They've been working together on data systems. So bringing him on to the Marine and Geology repository team was pretty essential, and he's been helping us out with kind of improving those data workflows. So although he doesn't live in Corvallis, even in pre-pandemic times, we've been having a lot of video conferences and meetings via Skype to kind of think through workflows and consider what tools and steps we would need to take in order to better digitize all of our collections, since we have so many things from all over the world that have been collected since the 50s. There's lots of things to consider.
Yep. Yeah. I think, in terms of the academic realm, your team really points out it kind of takes a village to keep a collection running, and then also keep it advanced enough that it's useful for the research community to be able to access samples. Maybe moving forward in your slides in terms of what you're doing. So let's see. So you moved from one massive collection to another massive collection of now stuff from the ocean. So instead of from the land, it's mainly from the ocean. And can you explain what you have up on this slide in terms of digitizing the information from your samples?
Yeah, so this is sort of like boiling it all down to like 3 images, but there's a lot of steps that come before this part. But this is an image of part of the collection that Maisie and Kara have been curating for several years, from the Marine and Geology repository, which is pretty global distribution of samples, but primarily Pacific Plate, Pacific Ocean type things. So these are some sediment core samples collected in 2004. And several years ago, they implemented putting barcodes on all the samples, which sounds like, well, I see those at the grocery store all the time, or, so that's pretty standard and routine, right? Yes, but in terms of collection management, it's a pretty new and important technology that has a lot of potential moving forward to make things even more streamlined. We have barcode scanners, and we're working on developing tools that we can just scan things in and pull them up in a database and add records to them. So that's sort of tying back into the whole data management side of things, not just cool geology, but all of these things in these tubes represent very cool geology.
Yeah, well, it's just like a library. You have this massive building with a ton of books. But how do you find them? You need some way to be able to discover them. And back in the day, we used to have card catalogs. We're probably dating ourselves, but now all of this stuff is online. So it's the same thing here. How do you find a core from the Pacific Ocean that you're interested in if you don't have it somewhere in a database or a digital record? So yeah, no, that's amazing. So it really does kind of just bring your collection into the present. Great. And then I think we had kind of, we'll jump back to the question, but your day-to-day activities, what do those look like besides the working on these digital workflows, which I do know is a big part of what a lot of curators are currently doing?
So there's a lot of, I just threw in a whole bunch of fun stuff, but I think this is what we should go to. So we've been working on, like you said, every day is different. Every single day is very different. So there's a lot of data management and dark data rescue, as I like to call it. So kind of working with the old records that were collected analog, 1960s, sitting on a ship, descriptions written by hand, scanned in, and then what do you do with that to make it accessible nowadays, as people want to be able to Google things. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of organizing those things and boiling it down to bite-sized projects or chunks, or like sorting out what the priorities of, like, should I work on this or this? I also collect samples for requesters. So people will say, hey, I want something from this core to analyze for carbon-14, or so I can measure the distribution of sand particles versus clay particles in these materials, and that will tell me something. And so I will take samples for people. So that's something that I do here and there as I receive requests. I work with our instrumentation, so taking pictures and collecting data off of samples for requesters, and organizing old data. And another thing that I've been working on is improving our system on our website for people to find our samples. So I've been toying around with the new Esri tools for Web App Builder to make a cool new map that people can query and look for specific data if we have it available. So yeah, trying to find better ways to make it easier for people to find stuff.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, I think the community is going to want to share in your map technology. So what are people looking at in terms of this worldwide map?
Thank you. Good question. So this is a worldwide map with ocean bathymetry in blue. So kind of the textures and elevation of the seafloor. And then all of the black dots are locations where cores in the Southern Ocean have been collected. So that is considered the Antarctic core collection, which I manage. And so yeah, each dot is where we have a sample from. The orange dots are our marine and geology sediment core collection that I talked about that have all the cool barcodes on them. The yellow ones are dredge rock samples, so not cores, but rocks from the seafloor that are managed by Kevin Conrad. And then there are a couple of teeny tiny green dots, and those are actually terrestrial rock drill cores from around Oregon that it turns out the state survey up here in Oregon does not have a sample storage facility. And so their cores were donated to Oregon State before my time here. And I think at some point lived under the football stadium, like lots of interesting stories of like where people have put stuff over the years. That's a theme of this line of work too. I'm sure Alex has some awesome ones too. And so we actually are taking care of those, and we have a set of racking that is unrefrigerated where we can keep those drill core samples. And that's been pretty exciting to get those racked up, not just because they're no longer in a musty basement, but they're all organized. We know everything that we have. It's kind of the best inventory that's ever existed for those samples at this time. So that's new. And yeah, that's a pretty new development, is letting people know that that's something that we actually have around. And it's been cool to have some rock cores around to talk about.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of collections have like what I call skeletons in the closet, where you have the material, you have it, but you haven't yet been able to digitize it in a way that other people know. So that's really great. And in terms of educating the public, I think do you engage in a lot of outreach in terms of not just with research, but with the general public?
Good question. Here and there. Generally, we interact a lot with school students. Our assistant curator, Kara Fritz, she's been kind of our outreach manager. And so we arrange for a lot of facility tours in non-COVID-19 times. We have some classroom activities that we do in the lab where we bring out kind of an awesome mix of cores of different, that represent different kinds of geologic processes. And so students can work through those, and it's a really neat and unique set of samples to look at. But in terms of general public, we just had our grand opening for our new facility that we've moved into in January, which is amazing that took place this year. And that was one of the biggest general outreach events that have ever happened in our college, actually. I can't remember off the top of my head, but I think it was like 270 people. It was in the local paper. It even made it, I think, into the Oregonian from Portland or Eugene. And so it was really cool to have that visibility and to see people in the community just get super stoked to know what the heck this was. So yeah, we had people that just came and were just like, we're here to see all the weird samples. We just want to know what it is. And they endured an hour-long tour inside the cold room at 37 degrees, and nobody complained. Everybody was having a great time.
Yeah, I think when people don't know what's there and they realize that, wow, this is a really cool collection, it's really inspiring for them to learn more about how the samples are used and what's going on. Well, cool. Is there anything else? So what are your, what's your favorite thing about your career now?
Gosh. Oh, there's so many aspects of it now. I mean, I think part of me enjoys that sort of, that variety. And just, you don't show up to work and expect to have the exact same thing happen every day. And that's very exciting. And it's fun to have a lot of different projects to keep you fresh and don't get too burnt out on, I'm just sitting here digitizing these old things. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things. I'm very excited about a lot of our database development things and sort of bringing the GIS world to the marine geology world because I think geology is spatial data. And there's a lot that we can do with that. And so kind of making that more accessible instead of, GIS, that's that, thing from the 90s. It's like, no, this is a great tool and it just keeps getting better and better. And kind of showing that and that's a useful tool. And then for students, GIS is something that can get you a job way, in many, many different disciplines. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think pointing out that, that your day-to-day doesn't look the same, I think that's great. That's definitely something I know for my personality. I love that feature of my career as well. It just keeps me engaged. And then also highlighting how different communities can benefit from coming together and being collaborative. So that's such an awesome facet of the academic world. And as well as being able to bring in students where they're learning skill sets that can lead to potential career paths. So all really awesome features of what you're doing. So yeah, I think we should maybe kind of work on wrapping up a little bit. I don't want to go too long. So is there anything else that I missed that you want to kind of talk about, whether it is anything leading up to where you are today or what you're doing in your work?
I feel like that's a pretty great summary of it. I will say though that I'm really enjoying, and I think this is one of the things that also makes working with the samples so exciting is getting to know the scientists that work on them. So for me, I've inherited this huge collection of samples. And so I got to know the scores and their data before I really got to know the scientists who collected them or are working on them. And just getting to be a part of the Antarctic marine geology world and getting to know the community and be active in it has been really cool too. And that wasn't something I thought initially, like, oh, the people are going to be what makes this fun. But it's really exciting to get to work with these people who are learning and discovering so many cool things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I feel like that connection with people is super important to feel engaged and also that you're doing something that's, really purposeful and meaningful for a community. So a fun question I like to ask is that if you could tell kind of a piece of advice or inspiration to students today, what would that be?
Oh, wow. Students today, something that they should know.
And it can be anything. I mean, it could be even more personal, or something that maybe you struggled with, or, you know, when you were younger, or even today, or could relate to current pandemic circumstances.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm kind of, let's see. Yeah, I think I try to help, think about the practical applications of everything that you work on in research. I mean, it's also like science is amazing and it's cool, but also thinking about the everyday applications of what you do. I think day to day and remembering why you're doing what you're doing and how important it is in society is very important. Um, yeah, that's something that kind of, I think you get kind of in the weeds in grad school. And I think it's kind of cool to kind of bring your head up and look around and think about how it all fits into the big picture. And that can be very motivating.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way to kind of wrap stuff up. You know, and yeah, I mean, I have to say I've learned so much more about kind of your journey and all of your experiences. It's definitely inspiring. And I think something that you were really good at was just jumping on different opportunities, being flexible, and then just kind of knowing what you want or what, and also things that you didn't want. So where, you know, you were willing to live, or situations you were dealing with that really kind of led you to where you are. So yeah, so do you want to add anything else?
I did have one slide that seemed pretty important, is that, having a life outside of work is also a very important, healthy, and smart thing to do. So I thought I would include a slide of the things that are important to me the other hours of the week. So my family, my pets, yes, you got 3 pictures of my dog. She's amazing. Cooking delicious food, getting outside, running far too many miles in the forest. Yeah. Oh, and coffee. Really good coffee is very important.
Yeah, that's super important. I mean, you know, having that work-life balance is very important. You've been really lucky. You've lived in really beautiful places, and Oregon is absolutely amazing. So yeah, no, I'm glad that you have that balance. And I know your animals and your husband are also happy for that too. I'm going to move this down
Yes.
to see your dog.
Yeah, and living in the Midwest is beautiful too. So I just realized, that also definitely qualifies as a beautiful place, even though like the most prominent thing here is a picture of Mount Hood. But yeah, the Midwest is awesome. Particularly the upper Midwest. I'm a big fan.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you can find beauty wherever you are. So it's
Absolutely.
yeah, I think the holder there. Okay, well, great. Thank you so much. It has been awesome talking to you, and I'm sure you'll be inspiring for the students and people who are listening.
Yeah, and thank you for inviting me. I think this is a really cool project. I know that I have seen other like career path discussions, and I've always been surprised at how, I assume it's like you get this degree and you get this job, and that path is far more winding and interesting and rich and full of experiences for so many people. So I think sharing those stories is really important, and I look forward to listening to the rest of your episodes.
Awesome. Yeah. I think, capturing these paths that nothing's ever a straight and narrow line from one place to the other is super important. And yeah, your journey definitely highlights that. So, well, great. Well, I thank you so much for being here. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, I guess we'll say bye to everybody. And I hope everybody enjoys this and some of the other interviews as well.
Great.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone.